Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time. Have you ever noticed that? How often our big institutions kind of sound the same when they're talking about tricky subjects? Well, to dig into that question, we're going to look at the systems of reputational risk that are humming along, often just behind the scenes. And for this explainer, we'll be using Douglas Murray's 2013 book Islamophobia as a case study, a lens to really understand how these powerful incentives can shape our entire public conversation. All right, so to really get a grip on this system, let's use a single powerful metaphor. Just imagine a smoke detector, but one that's been calibrated to be just a little too sensitive. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. When the cost of that alarm going off, the social or professional cost of an accusation is super high, the whole priority of the system shifts. It stops being about preventing an actual fire and becomes all about avoiding the alarm. And in that kind of environment, the whole system just naturally starts to prioritize avoiding risk above everything else. That subtle change in the game, that's the key to all of this. So, that's the theory. But how does this supersensitive alarm actually work in the real world? We're going to use Murray's book as our lens to see exactly how this system plays out when you apply it to a specific, and let's be honest, pretty contentious topic. The core idea of the book is that a lot of our public figures and institutions, we're talking everyone from politicians to media companies, are all operating in what you could call a reputational marketplace. And in this market, there's one label you absolutely, positively do not want: intolerant. It's a huge risk to your career, to your standing. So the system is basically designed to avoid that risk at all costs. So Murray's analysis really kicks off by putting these two terms side by side. In his framework, that charge of Islamophobia, that's the faint whiff of smoke that can set off our sensitive detector. And in response to that, he identifies what he calls Islamophilia. But he argues it's not necessarily a genuine belief, but rather the behavior people adopt to make sure that alarm never ever goes off. And this quote right here, it just nails the crucial point of his whole argument. He's framing this behavior as a totally rational response to the system's incentives. It's a risk avoidance strategy, plain and simple. You praise something really loudly, he says, so that nobody can ever accuse you of being afraid of it. You're trying to get out ahead of the alarm. Okay, so what does this actually look like on the ground? What happens when this oversensitive system is running at full tilt out in the real world? Well, first, according to Murray's analysis, the definition of what can trigger the alarm starts to get wider. Like, way wider. Suddenly, the category of things that could be labeled Islamophobic becomes incredibly broad. We're talking about everything from high art and opera to a kid's teddy bear and a Lego set. It makes it really, really hard to navigate the world without accidentally tripping one of these alarms. The second thing that happens is that public figures start to engage in what Murray calls preemptive praise. This quote from the novelist Merton Amis is held up as a perfect example. You can almost feel the frantic effort to signal respect and admiration. The incentives in this system absolutely favor this kind of public affirmation. It's like you're fireproofing yourself against any possible accusation down the line. And here's Murray's take on that kind of behavior. He argues that this isn't just a simple disagreement or someone changing their mind. No. For him, this is hard evidence of the system at work. The perceived reputational risk is just so massive that prominent figures will retreat before a debate has even really begun. They smell that tiny, faint crackle of smoke, and they are already heading for the exit. This dynamic, Murray argues, also creates a really noticeable imbalance and asymmetry in our cultural institutions, like the media. He points to two BBC series as an example, showing how totally different critical standards often get applied. One subject gets the full critical historical investigation, while the other is handled with extreme caution, with kid gloves. This kind of selective scrutiny is just another outcome of a system that's designed to avoid setting off alarms. So let's zoom back out for a second, because when you start to see these patterns, you realize this is about way more than just one topic or one book. This is really about how our public conversations are fundamentally structured. And what emerges is this incredibly powerful feedback loop. Think about it. The fear of the alarm makes people behave cautiously. But then, that widespread caution makes the alarm itself seem even more threatening, which, you guessed it, encourages even more caution. And over time, this loop can quietly but surely narrow the boundaries of what's even considered acceptable to say in public. And here's the real kicker. This whole structural dynamic, this management of reputational risk, it is not confined to religion, not by a long shot. You can see this exact same pattern, the same oversensitive smoke detector at play all over our society. We're talking corporate branding, political messaging, you name it. And that leads us to the final, really provocative question. When we see the output of this system, all the cautious statements, the preemptive praise, the different standards, what are we actually looking at? Are we seeing a real change in what people genuinely believe? Or are we just seeing smart institutions adapting to a risky environment? That confusion, that inability to tell the difference, that's the real crisis in perception. This project is totally free and publicly accessible, so if you'd like to support the time, tools, and research that go into making Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. And if you want to go even deeper, there's a longer audio-based analysis of this topic. Just check out the deep dive linked in the description below. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please do us a favor and like, subscribe, and maybe drop a comment with any books or topics you'd like us to explore next.